я маю велику честь і приємність вести цю подіум-дискусію. І зараз
It is my honor to moderate this panel discussion, during which we will probably delve into some details of the project. But before this happens, let me give our panelists a chance to introduce themselves and tell what they think they'll have been doing within its framework. Thank you. I'm Andriy, Posunko, an historian. Dnipro is my hometown. And in this project, I'll be looking at the south of Ukraine, its history, and I am a military man. This is my primary affiliation. Hello, I am Oksana, case historian, anthropologist, work at the National Academy of Sciences, Lviv. Within this project, I'll be looking at women in the Soviet Ukraine, trying to understand what it meant to be a woman. At that time, there were different women, different age groups, occupations. So I'll be looking at the gender perceptions of women, the ideology about the laws and institutions supporting the then gender policy, and of course at the practices, how women and men, so to speak, interacted with each other, and was there any room for variation and resistance. So this entire Soviet period of history, embracing different groups of women. I am Natalia Starchenko, an historian, work at the Ukrainian Institute of Archaeography, and this Ukrainian noble values of late Middle Ages and early modern times. In this project, I'll be doing what I think I can do good. This is the Ukrainian noble stratum. Well, Ukrainians would jump from old Rus to Cossacks, and the nobleman isn't indeed part of our history. I will try to show that the noblemen of Ukraine tied these parts of our history, because after all, they were elite, an elite responsible for culture, for shaping Ukrainian identity. They can give you an answer to the question who we are, and in late Middle Ages, early modern history, the word came before the sword. We people of Rus. So my task, as far as I can see, is to make our history whole, strong, and show how our ancestors in the past stood by their right, using not so much sword, but words, sometimes while looking for allies, sometimes while bluffing, sometimes. So I'll be looking at the values that we share amongst us in the past and today.
Good evening. I'm the only one who won't be speaking Ukrainian up here, aside from Professor Snyder. I am Barbara Skinner, but I'm going to proudly say, "Ya historikinya." I learned this. Okay, so I am from Indiana State University. This is, if you know Chicago, my university is about 3 hours south of Chicago. It is a small public university, so I do not come from an elite university in the United States. At my university, I'm the only person who knows anything about Eastern Europe or Russia. And so I teach very broadly on the subject, but specifically I research religious history in the lands of the partitioned Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. And my topic for this project is entitled Empire and Religion. So this is a big topic, but basically I'm trying to think about the perspective, not just from the perspective of the empire and the church hierarchy, but very important for me is the perspective from the parish and the ordinary Ukrainian peasants, because in the 18th and 19th century, religion was so important for their culture and their identity, and it is precisely in these centuries that we have extraordinary shifts in the confessional composition of right bank Ukraine, which was first Orthodox, then became Uniate, which is Greek Catholic, as we call it now, and then was forced to become Orthodox again. And yet through it all, you find patterns of specific local traditions that people did not want to give up. And so I consider that what I do is also very important for identity and continuity of identity despite change. So I think that's enough for now.
Доброго вечора всім. Мене звати Марта Andriiovych. Я стипендіат.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Marta Andriiovych. I'm a scholarship holder of a Swiss foundation, and I also study history in Oxford. I represent the capsule which is called Prehistory. We have a very important task to tell the history of Ukraine from the earliest times to the early Bronze Age. Of course, I am not alone in doing this. There's an international team. Dr. Yuri Samachin and others. We will together raise difficult issues and interesting issues in order to research and solve the most important milestones in archaeology, how people were spreading across the territory of Ukraine, what challenges they met on their way, how they overcame the climate changes, which were very dramatic when there was a transfer from Paleolithic to Mesolithic, how the population adopted and how they used natural resources. Very interesting issues that we will be studying.
Probably.
Я Timothy Snyder. Я 2 лата вчитель.
I am Timothy Snyder. For 2 years I was reading and I was learning how to select special scientific topics for this project and how to find responsible colleagues to do these jobs. So this I'm elated because those colleagues have accepted the invitation and I'm here. Thank you very much. I think that you now have a more precise idea about the project. You see that we have a lot of topics and spheres. And my question to everyone here who is on this stage about the idea of collaboration of such different people. And we have been working for the entire day today, very different groups. Maybe you will provide an example after today's discussion, what the discussion helped you to understand better about your own topic. Thank you. Well, the idea of this project is in collaboration, of course, and what is impossible for one person will be doable for a team composed not only of historians but also of art critics, natural scientists, and political scientists. When we use the expertise from each other, when we help each other, we can do something that won't be possible for anyone else. Today I witnessed a very fiery discussion between our archaeologists. They were talking about what happened in Ukraine in prehistoric times, how much interesting was there, what importance was it for Europe and the entire world. And this is one of the points that give spice to our project, and we may show what we have that makes the world a better place. For myself, it is very important that not only historians are gathered in this project, because we all have a special set of tools that we are explained in the past with. But it is very interesting to talk to people from other disciplines here, not only natural scientists, sociologists, linguists, literature scholars, and this allows us to sense the challenge. But on the other hand, today we had this cross-insemination, I would say, pollination. And you may learn from other people, from the people whom you would never meet under other circumstances, and you would not hear their thoughts and ideas about what you are going to do. So this is a chance to learn from the scholars and scientists about whom you were only dreaming. And I was also impressed with the generosity and preparedness of colleagues to share their knowledge and also to partake in the knowledge of others. Still, there is a space for autonomous creativity and autonomous work of everyone involved, but there's also the synergy of mutual reinforcement when people do not hinder each other, but on the contrary may help each other when there's a need. So this is very important for me to feel both autonomy and involvement in this project. This is a very fertile ground which helps bear ideas faster and maybe more interestingly. For me, the participation in this project is about responsibility, and this was my motive, my motivation. I understand very well that people from natural scientists can work collectively. This is their way of work. On the other hand, a scholar in humanities is a loner. And usually they are eye to eye with their reader. So the forum that we were suggested to take part in was rather dubious for me. I had some doubts. However, today's work does show how interesting the issues from other spheres of knowledge may be. And I worked with my colleagues who learned early modern times. We still understood each other very well, what is important and what we can omit. In my other group, another group, there were archaeologists and two people who study the 20th century, and this was a very hard and interesting discussion about what the history of Ukraine is and how archaeological cultures are one with the history of Ukraine, how they work for a wider and more global world. And I understand that we remain loners. Everyone writes their own part of the project, and we are responsible for what we are writing, but at the same time, this is a huge support and maybe an unexpected angle. We all know, really, that there are no stupid questions. And the matter is, when the so-called unprofessional question sounds, this means that you failed to explain something, and maybe this will make you regard your own topic under very different angles. So this aspect is very important for me in this project.
Okay, I have to say that the element of cooperation and collaboration on the project was the reason I said yes. Because the last thing I wanted to do was to write something else all by myself. And so this has exceeded my expectations. I also was a little bit worried about prehistory because I know nothing, right? And I don't know. But the thing is with history, the more you have different perspectives from different time periods, from different regions, the more you can ask better questions, right? So it is an enriching process because if you combine different perspectives, you come up with new questions. And the new questions are what make us really get excited. And so I am extraordinarily happy to have all of this collaboration. As I said, even at my university, I have no one I can speak to about my research. And so going to conferences is great, but usually I only talk to other religious historians or Imperial Russia historians. And so here, to have all of this very rich interaction of so many different perspectives is the thing that, for me, I feel very fortunate that I have this opportunity. This is something that every historian would dream of, right? I would think so, because I'm tired of working alone. I'm tired of not sharing with others what I do. And I'm grateful for the interest and for the input of everyone that I've spoken with in the, just today, and we have tomorrow too, so more to come. But yes, this is the reason I agreed to the project, and I'm very, very happy about this aspect of it.
Так, сьогодні був день неймовірних дискусій.
Yes, we had some unbelievable discussions today, inconceivable. And we had even, the start was in our rooms in the very morning, because I, as an archaeologist, was offered to tell everything that I love about archaeology. And there were very non-standard issues about my work, about my project. And this was all unbelievably good, from what Timothy Snyder told us, sorry, I'm very nervous, very excited, if we cannot explain our colleagues, historians and archaeologists what we are doing, how can we open this history for a reader who will be immersed in this history and will have to get acquainted with all the ideas and will start to ask their special questions. For me, this is a very special project, especially for me as a young scientist, young scholar. It is very, very exciting to share with those people their experience, people with world-famous names. So thank you very much for this day. Have you learned something new, what you haven't known before?
So, I mean, I love all of these answers because they confirm something that I deeply believe, which is that the social is also the intellectual. You can go a long way on your own, but if you stay by yourself the entire time, you end up feeling very confident about one thing, but maybe ignorant about everything else. And I had this kind of experience preparing for this project because I don't know anything about huge realms of the past, and because of this project, I began to read in fields that I knew nothing about. I've now read thousands of pages about Trypillia culture. I mean, that's partly because the archaeologists publish these books that are collected volumes. And there are like 20 of them on a dig, and each of them has their own opinion. So they write 20 different versions of the same dig. But I've now read a huge amount about Trypillia. I've read a huge amount about the Scythians. I've read a huge amount about Rus. And I know that I only know a little bit reading the books. And in order to actually learn, I have to find some person and say, hey, can you guide me? Like, what's really going on in this field? And I also found I have to go to places I hadn't been before. So in trying to prepare this project, I went to Gotland in the middle of the Baltic Sea, because Gotland is an essential place for Scandinavian history and also the history of Rus. And it seems very simple, but not knowing something and talking to somebody else and asking them a question and then listening to what they say is a very essential historical method. And also physically getting your body to the same place. Like, I'm very happy that we're all here. We couldn't do this over Zoom. We have to be here talking to one another. So preparing for this project reminded me, or really taught me, how important the collegiality was going to be. And I'm really glad to hear all this for another reason, which is that all these big promises I'm making about the 3 million word encyclopedia and all of this, this is only going to happen if we work together. It's only going to work, it's only going to hold together intellectually if we're able to hold together collegially as researchers.
Я скажу тільки, що мені сьогодні найбільше
Today, I had my best memory is the beautiful presentation about Khazarians, which very well explained to me what is the difference between Rus who came from the north and the Rus who remained in Kyiv. Because those who were in Kyiv, they were in close contact with Khazarians, and we are now adhering to the concept of longue durée, which is long history. We have to look at the process from a very long perspective, not from 50 years, but it has some danger and threats as well. I remember a cartoon where two Neanderthals were are standing next to each other, and one is asking, are we already Slavs or not yet? This is about roots. Of course, there are advantages and there are threats. I want to ask everyone what the long-term prospect suggests to your plots, to your topics, and can we legitimately talk about Ukraine's history? When do we have to start? Is there a difference between the history on Ukraine and Ukrainian history? Because it's about also being subjects and objects in the history. Let's start from Professor Snyder this time.
Well, I see far more opportunities than dangers in the longue durée, I have to say. I think that we have a problem, which is that too much history is focused on the later periods, and I'm guilty of that, and you're guilty of that, and most of us are guilty of that. And I think that many of the things we believe that we know about history are revised when we look at the earlier periods. And the other thing which is happening has to do with high technology. So if you apply the technology of the 21st century to the 21st century, all you do is stare at a screen and become stupid. But if you apply the technology of the 21st century to 6,000 years ago, then suddenly you can tell people's gender and you can tell where they came from by scraping DNA from fossilized human remains, right? If you apply the technology of the 21st century to 3,000 years ago or 1,000 years ago, you can date things from a piece of ash or a piece of bark, right? Ironically, the technology that we have now allows us to do the ancient periods much better. So a project can be very modern by also being very old. And when I read the literature from the earlier periods, I realize, the archaeologists and the early historians are moving debates much faster than we are in the later periods. And that's very interesting to me. So I see the earlier periods as something to learn from, and I'm also in an old-fashioned way moving to your question about when it's legitimate to speak of Ukraine. Being a Ukrainian is one kind of subjectivity. It's one way of being in the world. It's one way of seeing sense. And as Vladika Boris was saying, that seeing the sense of the world, making sense of the world, can be done in different ways. And they accumulate over time, and they bounce off each other, and they merge, and they split. And so I personally think that, and this was actually Victor Pinchuk's question at the very beginning, Kto my, who are we? I personally think that the question of being Ukrainian, having a Ukrainian sense of the world, is related all the way back to all the other ways that people, especially in these lands, not only, but especially in these lands, made sense of the world. So I think it's legitimate to go back all the way. And it's also legitimate to ask, okay, when did this particular Ukrainian subjectivity emerge? But when you ask that question, I mean, many of our modernist colleagues, they think, well, nationality is new, and therefore you don't have to know the past because it's constructed. But it's constructed from the things that were there. It's constructed from the materials, the historical materials that were there. And so there's no contradiction, I don't think. If you want to know about Ukrainian subjectivity, about Ukrainian national identity, you have to ask about all the other ways people made sense of the world before that. And that is a fabulously interesting journey. Because, I mean, if you're a nationalist, you think everyone was very dumb and then they discovered they belonged to a nation, right? Everyone was very hollow, and then they discovered the nation. But in fact, there were beautifully interesting other sensibilities on these lands, and there are traces of those sensibilities in archaeological sites. There are traces of those sensibilities in art. There are traces of those sensibilities in the artifacts, right? If you look at these things behind you, they express the people who made these things had a view of how the universe held together. It's not our view, but it is a view. And one of the things which makes me humble about the earlier periods, actually, is that I think sometimes their sensibilities were more sophisticated than our own. I mean, I think some of the people, for example, who founded Rus had a worldview which is more sophisticated than ours, more complicated than ours, and it's reflected in the art and to some extent in the literature. So I think that it's very refreshing to go back and back, even if we are concerned about the question of when this Ukrainian sensibility started.
Неймовірна честь продовжувати.
I have the honor to go on, to continue. This is very interesting from the point of view of archaeology, because I think that we have to go back, and back. We are fortunate in the sense that on the territory of Ukraine we have cultures up to the Paleolithic times. This is 1 million years ago. The first people came here, humans came here 1 million years ago, and the first people lived in Ukraine in Crimean mountains, in the Carpathians. Then something like 40,000 years ago, Homo sapiens came to Ukraine. And then, we have an opportunity to learn different settlements, different artifacts, and to see resilience and vulnerability of those people. This is what we can take along with us and see as the experience and think how we can meet the challenge of climate change. What are the common patterns, or there are no common patterns? These are little puzzles that we continue to hark back to, and they are building up our strategies. Besides, I want to remember the foreign passport of Ukraine. You can see archaeological objects there on every page, and I think that every site and every artifact that we may take pride in becomes a puzzle in the history of Ukraine. And this is very important. And I end with this.
Okay, as a historian, like scientists, we have different tools, right? So a scientist who studies small things will use a microscope. And we also have microhistory, where we're looking at one particular village or community and see how that connects to the rest of history. The longue durée, as we call it, is our telescope. We're looking way back in time, and it's a wonderful, again, new perspective on what you think is so important, right? My topic is the most important, but then shine that light, get that telescope, look far back, and it's a very humbling experience, and you get perspective. You place yourself in a bigger schemata of history that helps you understand exactly, perhaps, more connections with your theme, the way that perhaps influences exert themselves over the centuries. I deal with religion. We know that there was a spiritual element to human beings from the beginning, and this to me is very important, and I look forward to learning more from my prehistory colleagues who can tell me more about that, right? And so, it's just one more tool. It can't be the only tool, but it adds another layer of perspective that I think is incredibly valuable. Yeah.
Коли ми говоримо про історію України, таку
Whenever we talk about this longue durée Ukrainian history, obviously we're talking about a history as related to a specific territory. Quite a respectable piece of work dating back to 19th century. All European nations did it. Nobody looked at ifs, what did happen if. Palestine once has posed a question, has there ever been India? He says, well, we would probably have not an India, but something else, had it not been for some development. So we, on one hand, we are looking at a very respectable history, but shouldn't forget what Mr. Hrytsak turned our attention to: Ukrainians, Ukrainian history versus history of Ukraine. This is a very challenging thing for an historian to address, because when we hear someone's crying, this is probably not attributed to a baby. No, you have to be mature enough to produce this sound. On the other hand, this can probably prompt us how deep we can probe into the history. I am dealing with that history that has to be sensitized to this first initial, so to speak, voice. And we are in a relatively comfortable, convenient situation, because Ukrainians started to emerge at about the same time that all that modern Europe started to emerge, on the brink of 15th, 16th centuries. So we are looking at society trying to recreate its past history. Some say that communities, nations can use different languages or cultures, and that community turns into a nation when it starts getting an idea, a common idea of its past. And I am working with the material showing how a community starting to take shape when it becomes aware of its common history. These are the rights of ours, these are our princes, these are our towns. At the same time, this is a long-range perspective, Cossacks history. So when we often use some tools that were created in the 19th century. Well, Ukrainians are Orthodox Christians, or Cossacks are Orthodox Christians. So it's always interesting to see how people living in the same territory that belong to different traditions, cultures, or religions start calling themselves one. We are Rus. We are different than our neighbors. We are distinct from our neighbors. So we have to always be mindful of this short-term perspective without abandoning this very palpable, so to speak, perspective through which India or Ukraine came into being. I, for one, believe that Ukraine displays something that can dismantle lots of theories that always try to connect people to boundaries, to geographical area. No, we are the proof of the fact that territories may change, but Ukrainians stay in history. A Catholic or, well, Jan Szczesny Herburg once wrote a letter in 1616 to the Pope, because Pope had reprimanded him for not standing by the Uniate Church. And in this letter he said, well, I am a Catholic, but I am a member of Rus people who once was a great land, a kingdom that had to join other kingdoms, not provinces, through some circumstances, so unhappy circumstances, and by doing so he showed this connection between his country and the kingdoms that existed within these territories. So our project is very instrumental in keeping the unity of this long-term and short-term perspective on our history. We are a country of absolutely political Ukrainians, but the idea of a political Ruthenianism was born in the 16th century. At the same time, we should always understand what makes us unique in this global perspective. Thank you. As an historian, I feel quite comfortable when I talk about mid-19th century to date. I am typically fearful of looking deeper into the history, but as someone who is dealing with women's history, I find that there are many things common to the Ukrainian history, and, well, once people questioned the existence of history of Ukraine, but wasn't it the same for women whose history was questioned? Women remained invisible throughout the history, more or less, or women's history is oftentimes looked through the optics of the better known individuals, but Ukrainian historic narrative comes in different densities when we talk about our history. There are some periods, there are some milestones that we know a lot about, but there are other periods where certain regions, social strata are less known, and this might have a chilling effect on our desire to look into the earlier periods of Ukrainian history. So as we go on discovering women's history, we, at least within the framework of this project, we could explore those understudied periods, regions, nations, social groups. So the thickness of this historical broth will probably help us come up with a better understanding of its ingredients, answering the questions who we are, where did we come from, and where we're going. We have 1 second left, so let me tell you when Ukrainians came into being. Well, 1612, the Great Ruin, and a Ukrainian Cossack, Oleshka Zakhariev by name. When Muscovites asked him who he was, he said with great pride, "I am a Ukrainian." So, Professor, well, names tend to change. It's a different story, a different discussion. But technically, the first person to ever call himself a Ukrainian, much before Lesa Ukrainka, was Ukrainian Cossack Oleshko Zakhariev. We have 90 historians. Can you imagine how interesting it's gonna look 3 years from now? With this, I would like to appreciate the